communist stuff. It's so funny when these people tell me I'm grifting. I'm a communist grifter or some stupid thing. I don't mind upsetting bigots. Gay people have to fight, women have to fight, and trans people have to fight.
Any time on the internet will at some point lead to seeing many left-leaning economic positions. That is sadly the reality of the internet. In this video, I'll be talking about NyaraVT and the insane leftist rhetoric that she often parrots. If you're unaware, Nyara is a popular trans femme VTuber that mostly talks about trans rights, their issues, and the solution to said issues. However, in this video, I want to specifically explain how Nyara uses trans social commentary to push for socialist and progressive policies, while failing to understand any of the right's actual beliefs, often lying to vilify the opposing party, and pushing for extremism in her own community. This all sounds absurd, but I mean to fully defend this position. And oh, don't worry, we'll be talking about the Kirche drama. To demonstrate this, let's look at this commentary of socialism and capitalism that Nyara provides.
It's so funny when people who are like anti-socialism, when they talk about socialism being bad, they literally just describe capitalism. It's like, oh, you know, socialism is bad because you're giving money to the people who just don't deserve it. You're taking it away from the working class and giving it to the wealthy rich people. It's like, that's not socialism.
The issue present here is the belief that DEI actively enforcing equal hiring leads to more meritocratic hiring practices. This cannot exist, simply due to the conflating definitions they have for fairness. Meritocracy is defined by the person best fit for a position deserves to get hired, while DEI focuses on ensuring equal hiring representation for marginalized groups, often appear as mandated goals such as half of the company hiring should be female. This means that if an incredibly strong candidate applies to a position, but the company is only looking for female hires, he would sadly be rejected from the position, directly contradicting meritocracy. This has been actively proven, with Asian and white candidates with higher SAT scores get rejected in favor of minority candidates with lower SAT scores in college admission. While you may argue that this process is necessary, you will have to concede that meritocracy can't coexist with DEI. Next up,
you know, like, I don't hate anyone, but like, I still consider myself a conservative. And then you look at conservative values, especially like in the past couple of decades, and you see those are literally just fascist tropes.
Oh boy. So the big issue with Nyara's content is that she very easily throws around the word fascism on anyone right of Kamala. The issue quite obviously is that when brought to its logical conclusion, anyone who doesn't align with a neo-Marxist view is seen as a fascist. This radicalizes people to adopt violent, extremist positions and should be assigned to not take anything she says seriously. Vosh does the exact same thing, and here's how another leftist feels about it.
I might call red fashion can stray into it, but it's irrelevant.
But Viv, how do you reconcile that with what Bosch said earlier, that intent doesn't matter? Before
please,
intent
for
was...
the love of fucking God, Pisco, stop fucking lumping me in with Bosch when I'm quite clearly saying that I think he's being irresponsible in his rhetoric, and I disagree with his idea that, like, George Bush is a fascist, okay? Please fucking stop it.
Simply replace Vosh for Nyara, and you will accurately be able to explain why she shouldn't be taken seriously. Big yikes. Actually, on the same topic, this doesn't only apply to fascism. Nyara openly describes right-leaning individuals as in favor of reducing the age of consent. This is in stark contrast of actual conservative positions, with many Republican bills actively trying to increase age of consent laws, or increasing the penalty for offenders. Oklahoma, New York, Alabama, and California are 4 such examples. Additional information is in the description. This is unsurprising to those actually well-versed in conservative epistemology, as they are overwhelmingly in favor of promoting traditional values and moral restraint, which to them a reduction in age of consent actively discourages. This is another example of Nyara poisoning the conversation between leftists and conservatives and focusing on optics over truth. Next up,
have like in school programs like, oh, we want to push girls and get them interested in scientific like fields, you know, because if you go to university or whatnot and you want to study something like, let's say, electrical engineering, you're going to have like 95% just like men. So a lot of women, a lot of, marginalized groups don't want to go into these areas because these people are like gatekeeping these jobs. And like, even if you do finish studying and you become like an engineer and whatnot, and you're like really qualified, people are still going to like question whether or not you're actually good enough because you're not a man. And then people come along and it's like, oh, misogyny is actually no longer real,
Alright, so a common thing that Nyara does is go on rants, switching between topic to topic without clear consistency. This mostly has to do with the livestream format, and while entertaining, can lead to very bad takes when examined. To explain why her point fails, I suggest looking at this Mises Institute article. But to summarize, unequal outcomes don't equal discrimination. There are many biological and psychological differences between men and women that lead to these inequalities, such as men simply being more interested in physics and mathematics, while women are more interested in social sciences and healthcare. And no, this isn't the patriarchy keeping women down, rather rational actors having the freedom to choose what they are interested in and acting to achieve those goals. It's one of the reasons women account for 89% of nurses or 94% of childcare workers. This is known as the equity fallacy, and pretty much every neo-Marxist commits this fallacy. In the case of Nyara, in the 20 or so of her videos that I watched, she unironically uses it in almost every video. It is very common and very dumb. Next up,
gender identity, and they're like fragile little things. Like, it's not a big deal to just gender me correctly, but for them it's like such an abomination. It's hurtful for them. They are so triggered.
The pronoun question. This is the clip that originally made me make this video, as Nyara has absolutely no idea on the right's view on this issue. Much of the issue here is that leftists equivocate not using preferred pronouns with harassment, and actively aggressing on people for not using said preferred pronouns. The reason this is so bad is that it is impossible to force someone to use your preferred pronouns without coercive action and aggression. That's one of the reasons you see people getting cancelled for not using pronouns, or their livelihoods being destroyed. The correct way to deal with this issue is that right-leaning people have to understand that they have the freedom of speech and autonomy on what they want and don't want to say, while leftists like Nyara can freely disassociate from the opposing party and anyone who doesn't comply with their beliefs. Nyara grossly misrepresents the right on this issue, and she sees it as a simple act of hatred, as seen at the end of the clip. While when examined, the right is pushing back on certain cultural changes of the past 15 years, which if you believe in self-ownership and property rights, they totally have the freedom to do. This brings me to my next point about the recent controversy surrounding Nyara's involvement in Kirsch's drama. To summarize the Kirsch drama, Vice journalist Ava Valence published a hit piece trying to basically cancel Kirsch's sponsorship with her longtime partner, GamerSubs. This was done by parroting the rumor that Kirsch was a white supremacist for professing anti-immigration beliefs.
I get increasingly angry when I see people who are just like, well, they're not doing anything illegal, so like you can't really be mad at them. It's like this is very clearly a hostile takeover. Like, we're experiencing it in the US via illegal immigration. They're experiencing it in the UK via, like, the migrant crisis nonsense and refugees, which... potato.
Kirsch sent a cease and desist letter to Vice, who took down the free articles. Nyara, largely agreeing with the progressive left, entered the drama by basically calling her community Nazis and fascists. What I, however, want to do is examine if Kirsch deserved the fallout and if Nyara was making a point. Spoiler alert, she wasn't. Absolutely not. The reason Kirsch is largely correct on this issue is that wildly different cultural practices almost always lead to some level of conflict. If you spend any time on the internet, you may know the phrase, Islam is right about women. This statement is meant to expose cultural relativism and explain why freedom of association is so important. If you disagree with the statement, Islam is right about women, you accept that culturally progressive societies and individuals should be able to freely disassociate from Muslims' cultural conservatism, who obviously don't share the same beliefs. If you agree with the statement, you conceive that Muslims should be free to disassociate from the Western progressive type. The simple point made stems from the fact that when two differing, logically incompatible viewpoints clash, conflict starts, and it will continue until one party culturally integrates and the conflict resolves itself. Leftists, who predominantly believe in cultural relativism, don't believe that this conflict even exists, and thus avoiding the contradiction present in the statement. somewhat living in a utopian bubble where cultural conflict simply doesn't exist. Kirsha, on the other hand, recognizes that fact and thus chooses to freely disassociate from Muslims as they largely oppose her views. However, since the left lacks any capacity to understand Kirsha's point of view and only are able to interpret the question through the good old oppressor-oppressed narrative, they call her a white supremacist, patting themselves on the back for their collective good thing. The other parts of the article aren't much better. The sensual mimicry screenshots are ridiculous. They equivocate a person being a Nutsi, with Kirsha being the one who radicalizes him to being a Nutsi. This is obviously flawed reasoning and can very easily be flipped on its head and call any creator a bigot. And no, her retweet doesn't prove anything, and she was clearly promoting her plushie, and she didn't read through all the books that were on Sensu's Twitter post. I'm not even going to go into the Dwayne Jenkins article, because really it is just slop. Simply journalists seething that their smear campaign backfired, now conflating criticism with harassment. Kinda like Gamergate. Goes full circle, doesn't it? Nyara, who mostly agrees with the journoid bullshit, is really no different. She fails to see the point Kirsha is making, agrees with the game journalist's message, and engages in Twitter drama, which she unironically says so. Just another instance of Nyara not understanding the right's point of view and engaging in bad faith. Sad, really. Next clip.
A lot of people actually are more progressive because they see how like the upper class is like ruining them, but because the media is owned by the upper class, it shifts their perspective of the world. It messes with their brain, like transphobia rots your brain, you see.
So this statement comes really close to being true, but also very far. The media, while owned by wealthy individuals, in many cases parrots the center-left to left-leaning beliefs that Nyara should agree with. If you're familiar with Moldbug, you will quickly spot this left-leaning media bias as the cathedral. To summarize, it is the observation that many of our academic elites, such as mainstream media and academia, often collectively push for some sort of narrative. This narrative changes over time. In the 1970s, it was more right-leaning, and today it is much more left-leaning, to the point that some major US mainstream journalists and opinion articles practically mirror Nyara's own beliefs. This is obviously in stark contrast to her belief that mainstream media is responsible for transphobia, and this is just another attempt to be divisive and grift other trans people into the left. The biggest issue with that is, unfortunately, the left very seldom can actually help these individuals to get better. Since the left sees everything through a victim-oppressor narrative and the belief in systemic oppression, this makes trans individuals adopt victim identities, seeing themselves as second-class citizens, leading to the adoption of irrational socialist beliefs such as free gender reassignment surgeries, something that can only be done through heavy taxes on a country's citizens. This is why many leftists adopt such radical positions on taxing the rich. To further demonstrate this point, let's look at this clip.
Capitalism is just a system to make the rich richer and the poor poorer, and the general public is buying into it. They've been told a lie, which is if we tax the rich, if we make it impossible for people to actually become billionaires and exploit the system, then everything would crumble. And they sheep believe the lie.
To give a clearer picture of the fallacy explained here, imagine we have two cities, each with 100 people. Imagine that city A is fully equal with each person making the same amount, while city B is much more unequal. But when taking the average citizen's income, it turns out to be greater than that of the average person living in City A. Now, while yes, City A is more equal, but you would much rather live in City B, because you will be richer. This ties to the fixed pie fallacy that states that resources and wealth are fixed constants and that someone gaining proportionately more means that another person necessarily loses. Well, no. If someone like Elon Musk builds a Tesla, he, while gaining profit, also creates new values in the form of cars, jobs, and technology that didn't exist before, essentially meaning that the pie grows. This is why the median income has been steadily growing in first world countries which adopted free market policies. Now, a response to this would be to keep free market policies which help make the pie bigger while taxing the rich, to ensure that at least the poorest will receive some help, right? Well, again, not really. Simply put, to grow an economy, you have to make sure that people are willing to take a risk on starting a business and have the confidence that this risk will eventually lead to a better outcome for them. If they now know that wealth will get eaten up by taxes, it will stop such entrepreneurs to start a business and create jobs, leading to the pie actively getting smaller. The second point worth acknowledging is that taxing the rich doesn't guarantee that it will lead to a more egalitarian government. The state is notoriously inefficient with taxpayer spending, often leading to an increase in spending on other areas rather than in the one you advocate for. I will link this Mises article for anyone interested in exploring this issue further, But the gist is that private ownership overwhelmingly outperforms the public sector in cost, quality, and consumer satisfaction, and many government regulations distort prices so as to keep monopolies in place, such as in the US. To any trans person who managed to make it to this part of the video, you would actually be able to afford many of your treatments for a fraction of the price, if not for patents that your government practices with Big Pharma. It seems as if Nyara also subscribes to the oppression narrative in the world of sports. Let's look at this one example.
In areas like sports, etc. It's like, why do we need separated sports? Because men are so like fragile and they don't want to play with women and lose against women. You see big games that weren't separated categories until women started winning some categories. Oh yeah, the reason why men's football is so much bigger than women's football is because like it used to be the other way. Because like during World War, the women were able to play, and actually all the women were filling stadiums and whatnot. And the thing is like, then suddenly they just like started gatekeeping the soccer field.
Now, it doesn't take a biologist to know that men and women have clear differences in body structure. Men on average have higher muscles to body ratio, men have higher bone density, and are faster than women while also being taller. All of these factors play a large role in physical sports. That is why professional sports at the highest level are male dominated. Fans of those sports usually only care for the best of the best and are willing to really only pay attention to the games at the highest level. In football, for example, that is why the strongest teams, like Barcelona, are also the most popular and richest. That's also the harsh reality of why there's such staggering differences between the pay of professional male and professional female players. Female sports leagues consistently lose money every season and require the male league to subsidize it and eat any revenue loss. That is, in fact, the harsh reality. And the thing is, pretty much all sports fans know this issue, that even complete normies that never cared about politics understand this fact. Only does the progressive left actually care about this issue, for the simple fact, as this enforces their belief in the patriarchy and systemic oppression. It's simply confirmation bias, which is a shame, because when you look at a less physical sport, like chess, you'll see that the competition between men and women is much more fierce. Judith Polgar, one of the greatest chess players, is a highly respectable figure in the community, going toe-to-toe and even beating the world's greatest player, Magnus Carlsen. The left could actually make a solid case for there to be no gender separation in the sport, with many chess clubs already implementing such tournaments. However, they would rather focus on the oppression narrative in physical sports, where men have a total biological lead. Whether you think Nyara knows this and is simply grifting her audience, or she actually lives in La La Land, is really anyone's guess. And now for the last example, and perhaps the most dangerous, is the tendency for Nyara to partake in leftist racism. If not familiar with, leftist racism works by using colloquial definitions of racism, but framing it through the optics of justifying diversity, equity and inclusion, and improving collective equity. In general, this means that the left views the European straight male as the most privileged. This is very similar to the discrimination seen in the workforce, as we discussed at the beginning of the video, just focused on the cultural impacts and their consequences. Yeah, unsurprisingly, this has been shown to actively worsen race relationships between racially differing groups, as the group being discriminated against does not usually like to be discriminated. Nyara, however, completely misunderstands this point as to why white men drift away from the left and are starting to join the right, completely ignoring that people don't like to be seen as the villain. Instead, Nyara doubles down on the collective guilt, as seen here.
Serious? There are so many jobs where it's just like unnecessarily harder as a woman. You need to be able to like actually acknowledge that in order to be part of the solution. And this is why it's all men until it's no men. And for a lot of people, it makes them upset because they don't want to be the villain. They don't want to acknowledge that they are in the wrong.
Of course, to fix the issue caused by collective guilt and the progressive stack, you double down on collective guilt. And if you disagree with this rhetoric, you're either a fascist evil mustache man or a transphobe, maybe even both. The left may defend this by changing the definition of racism to equal prejudice plus power, as if changing the definition automatically means you are no longer racist. I hope that from this example, you may better understand that Marxist progressive types absolutely do engage in racist rhetoric that harms pretty much everyone. Conclusion time. As you can see from this video, many of the rhetoric that NyaraVT talks about in her rants is in fact easily disprovable socialist garbage. Many of her attempts at refuting the right end up just as bad faith smear campaigns that breeds extremism in her fans. Mind you, this is only a drop in the bucket in comparison to the plethora of other easily refutable content that she has made. While preparing to make this video, I watched about 20 of Nyara's video, and unironically, you can spot a logical fallacy in every other sentence she makes. If I delve deep into her opinions on Christianity and even AI, we would all be here for an extra hour. However, I hope that this is enough to showcase the issue that her content presents. A reminder that I only focus on the validity of her arguments. I obviously do not condone any harassment that NyaraVT receives. I obviously believe that any harassment is very cringe. I'd also want to thank Aquinas for bringing me this topic to my attention and helping out with some of the script writing. His Substack link will be in the description. Thank you for your time. This was my first video on this channel, and if you know any way I can potentially improve my content, I will greatly appreciate it. Goodbye!